Hi, Internet. It's Emily SW.
Sam.
And we are coming at you with another episode of the Podcastle.
Dun, dun,
dun. Today we have a March special by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who, despite his French name, was actually Irish.
Bram Stoker was also Irish, wasn't he?
Yeah. And he was, because it is quite interesting to me that two of the most prominent vampire fiction writers are both from Ireland.
Also interesting because the vampire myth does not originate in Ireland. And there's plenty of other Irish monsters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And,
plenty.
And this is not about Stoker, and I don't know if I have the brain power to fully take this angle all the way, but I am sure you could make some commentary about how two of the most prominent Gothic vampire authors were both Irish, and the political climate of England and Ireland has been, let's just say, fraught. Pretty much the entire history, because Sheridan, we did the podcast about Carmilla, so we have talked about him before, but he comes before Stoker.
He was also quite a prolific author of ghost stories. He's a little overshadowed in our era by Stoker and other authors.
Yeah, he really is, which is a shame, because both Carmilla and this, I don't know, I don't even think I said the title of the story. The story we're reading is Ultor de Lacy, A Legend of Cappercullen. So this and Carmilla, like everything I've read by him is just, it's so compelling. It's so juicy. Not that Dracula wasn't. This is not a ding against Bram Stoker. I just think my boy Sheridan deserves a little more love. Although, and I do have to wonder if part of that reason is the fact that Carmilla is so, you can't see me, but I just flapped my hand and let my wrist go limp. Carmilla is such an important queer story. So I do wonder if that's part of it.
But he has so many stories.
He does. We had, when we were looking into this, I had picked out a couple that I thought, they all sounded interesting, so I had narrowed it down, and then we went with this one. But he's got a lot of ghost stories. He's also, there are other ones of his stories that have directly inspired other famous authors as well. Even though he's less well known in the modern age, he was very well known during his time because a lot of people either took inspiration or blatantly copied him. Because I haven't read this story yet, but I was reading that one of his stories, Bram Stoker, low-key, just stole it. Just took the plot and made his own version.
Do you know which one it was?
Yeah, I have it in my notes. It was an account of some strange disturbance in Angier Street. A-U-N.
I read that one.
Oh, did you?
I did, because, here was some of, it wasn't a difficulty, but here was some of the complications I had trying to read it, because on my Kindle, I had just, a free version, and it's, Le Fanu's Ghostly Tales. But the Kindle only had volume 1, which is, let me see it, because Libby has the full thing, which has...
Oh, nice.
Ultor de Lacy in it, so that's where I read it. But I had to go into the app, and every time I want to look at it, I have to go to manage loan, and then read with Libby specifically, because first it says read with Kindle, so I thought, okay, well I'll just read it on the Kindle, because the screen's just nicer to look at. But the Kindle one keeps trying to tell me, you already have this, and then it pulls up the one that I already had, which only has volume 1 in it. And I need the entire thing. This has every single volume in the library version. So I have to go into the app and pick Read with Libby. But the disturbance on, Angier Street?
Yeah.
Is in volume 1 of the Ghostly Tales.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, I just, I read this, I just found a free version online, so that's the one that I read. Although I am planning on reading his other stuff. The one that Bram Stoker supposedly stole, or the title of his story that he based very heavily on Angier Street, is called The Judge's House. So we might read both of those, and then if it's interesting or juicy, maybe we can do another Podcastle.
My memory of that story, if this is the one I was thinking of, a good scary ghost story.
Yeah, and he has a really good way of making things feel sufficiently creepy. His way of describing things, I think, is very compelling. He really sets a scene.
Yeah, that was kind of his angle. He was more focused on atmosphere and, this is very Gothic anyway. Like that's what makes Gothic different from horror is the atmosphere and the sense of dread rather than the shock value. But he was a master of it.
Yeah, and really kind of pioneered it, too. Sheridan made money by he wrote for a newspaper that he either owned it or he was like the editor. Yeah, he co-owned the Dublin Evening Mail, the Warden, the Protestant Guardian, and the Evening Packet. And then he also purchased Dublin University Magazine. But yeah, he basically made his living writing, as well as being a journalist and publishing and all that stuff.
A lot of our authors so far have kind of similar backgrounds where they're working in newspapers or they're associated with someone who works in newspapers.
Nepotism. Well, I guess if it's you yourself who get the job, that's not really nepotism. But there's also in the story we read, Ultor de Lacy, there's a lot of historical little tidbits that I was having just a grand old time researching. Because it started off, for me personally, I had to look up a couple words because his language is just old-fashioned.
Considering this was published in the 1860s.
Yeah, so I was already, looking things up. So anytime there were little things, I went on a little side quest to figure out if the castle in the story is a real place. Which it is, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the castle in this story is based on either British Castle or the Cappercullen house, which is probably the Cappercullen house because it's in the title. But I was having fun. I was like, okay, well, based on is located in this county of Ireland. And I looked up the town he mentioned, Moreau, and I looked up castles near that town. I was very proud of myself. I felt very smart.
Did the full detective research.
I did.
Any astounding conclusions?
I wouldn't say astounding. I did very much get the feeling that if you were reading it during the time this was published, you would absolutely have understood de Lacy's, how should I say this, political leanings. Because as he was Protestant, and Irish Protestant at that. And if you know anything about European, UK history, Irish history, Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, always going at it. That also, the other thing that ties into here, de Lacy in particular, the Jacobite Rebellion, which wasn't really an Irish UK thing, or Irish-British thing.
Scotland.
Yeah, it was Scotland.
See, I know this one. I know this because of Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Battle of Culloden.
Yeah, there's a lot of little references.
The short of it is they wanted to put Stuart back on the throne of England. Were defeated at Culloden.
The Jacobite Rising of 1745 is referenced directly in the story, and then there was another one. Oh, that song that comes up near the end. One of the characters sings a very traditional Irish folk song, and I actually, it's Shula Rune, which when I was reading it, I was like, that sounds really familiar. I don't know if this has come up in Emily S.W. lore on the Podcastle yet, but I Irish danced for a very long time. And I also, my family has Irish heritage, so I've listened to a lot of Irish music in my day. So I looked it up, and it's Shula Rune is it's a traditional Irish folk song, which some people say has its origins in the Revolution of 1688, also known as the Glorious Revolution. It's all linked. He's really going at it with the Jacobites in this story. And if you don't have that historical context, I think a lot of the background of the story would just not make sense.
Well, without it, it's just a very simple revenge story.
Yeah, with a lot of extraneous details. Because he really does. It comes up a lot. But it made me think of that kind of death of the author theory, which I feel like I bring up all the time, but I think about it all the time. But this in particular, if I just read it, it would be a good story. It's a really good kind of creepy, has vampire vibes, has ghost vibes, there's a haunted castle, has everything. But without the historical context, a lot of the references get hidden. I don't know. I like feeling like a detective. But anyways, yeah, so this story isn't actually about a vampire. Well, it could be. It's like a ghost that's described with very vampiric tendencies.
He never really defines what kind of monster it is.
No, it's generational trauma. That's what it is.
Yeah, I was mostly reading it as a ghost because its interactions with the living people are not very direct.
Yeah, and it's always disappearing.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have, the most important thing about vampires is they drink blood. And that certainly doesn't happen in the story at all.
He does drive one of the family members mad, I guess.
Well, a ghost could do that too.
But
I mean, you don't even need a ghost if some of our Anne Radcliffe stories tell us anything. You just need the idea of a ghost.
It's true. That's true. I mean, everything's scarier without an explanation, right? Until you explain it, it could be a ghost. Unless you're Anne Radcliffe, in which case it's never a ghost. That's I think another thing that makes his writing kind of so haunting, atmospheric and compelling and creepy is that he doesn't do the thing where he explains everything away. Like he lets it be supernatural. But so the monster in this story is definitely a ghost because it's created by the De Lacy family hanging an Irish-Spanish general, which is also based in history, I found out. This was another one of Ultor. The name of this character means avenger or punisher in Latin. And it's also an epithet for Mars. So Mars the Avenger, Mars Ultor. And so this kid, from birth, from the day he was born and named, just cursed.
He says that it's a weird name, too. He calls it a strange name.
He does, which is why I looked it up. I honestly, when I was reading all this up, at the very beginning of the story, he's setting the scene. And this is another thing we've encountered in more than one short story that we've read, where it's framed as like a second or third hand account, where somebody tells the narrator the story, and then the narrator is like, oh, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to record this.
Yeah, you know what it reminded me of? It was like in the Abbott's Ghost, where they were sitting around the fire telling ghost stories.
Yeah.
I think he said, too, that it was during the winter time that he heard this.
Yeah, that's like the first... I have the story up, so I'm just looking at it. In the first kind of paragraph, before we even get into the story, the narrator is just telling us basically how he heard the story. Yeah, he's basically translating a ghost story that, normally you would listen to when you're locked up in the winter and the windows are rattling and everything's dark and creepy.
And now that we have the background of people telling ghost stories for fun around Christmas time, I think that gives a lot of context to why so many of the books written in this time period were also set up as someone telling us a story that they heard from someone else.
Today, there's still telling ghost stories or scary stories is still, it's not as much of a thing, but it is still a thing that people do.
Yeah, on your camping trip around the bonfire.
Yeah, or even on YouTube, story times.
Wuthering Heights was kind of like, it was still written as you have a narrator who's being told this account by someone else, rather than actually putting us into the action with the characters as it's happening.
Yeah, you have an extra level of kind of removal there. But it's also, and I mean, this also varies story by story, but for this story in particular, he doesn't call, like, the narrator doesn't call attention to himself very much, aside from at the very beginning and the very end. So I kind of forgot about him, because I was so absorbed with the dramas of the characters. And then I remembered, oh yeah, the narrator is also a character, which is not always the case.
You just need that level of protection against the horrors.
Yeah, that's true. Right off the bat, in the very beginning when we're still learning about our narrator, that's also when we find out that this story is based on a real place and real political goings on of real families. So the De Lacy family in this story is actually based on, I'm pretty sure it's a real story. Now, I haven't fully looked into this yet. This is on a later search to do. But I briefly found out that the De Lacy family was a real family, and there's a radio play that's also about the De Lacy family and executing a bunch of people. So that is a real thing that happened. It's a real family. It's a real thing that happened. We get this historical background right off the bat. And, it's Cappercullen is a real place in Ireland. If you were reading this when it came out, it could seem very real.
Did you, I know you put a link to the real Cappercullen on our notes.
Yes.
Did you look at that link at all?
I did a little bit. I didn't go super in depth.
The Cappercullen house. Even, I think there was a map in there from the 19th century, and even at that point, it was already in ruins.
Yeah, this story is set, I believe it's the late 1700s.
Yeah, if Ultor was alive for the Jacobite Rebellion, it would have to be, because that was in 1745.
Ultor de Lacy's father died. The narrator is like, I don't remember exactly, I think it was 1705. Ultor de Lacy's father dies, leaves him a legacy of an estate, which was actually his mother's, which is where the Ireland part comes in, because his married name is de Lacy after his French father, but his mother, and now I found this out by my further internet searches, this is not explicitly in this story, but I believe it's O'Donnell is the mother's name, which is how he gets the land.
O'Donnell was a name that comes up later.
Because this is all based in fact as far as I could tell from what I was looking up. Whether the ghost was real or not, couldn't tell you.
Well, you know what I was thinking? We should just do, like, the Sheridan Le Fanu tour of Ireland.
Oh, hell yeah.
And, like, visit places relevant to his life and work.
Business expense.
Yeah.
That would be so cool. I've been working on a short story that's set in Alaska, and I was toying with putting it, like, on an Alaskan cruise, or in, like, an Alaskan cruise port city. And I was like, man, if I publish this, and I have to go do research, could that be a business expense? I want to go see whales in Alaska. Anyways, I also want to go to Ireland. So the Cappercullen house it's not on the coast, but it's on the western side of Ireland, which, if you're not familiar with the geography, it's the end furthest away from England, and like Dublin and Belfast, the two, I would say, most famous Irish cities, are on the other side. So Belfast is in Northern Ireland, and Dublin's in the Republic of Ireland. So yeah, this is on the other side of the...
Off the beaten path.
Yes. And even when I was looking up the little town he mentions is called Moreau, which is actually spelled differently now than the way it's spelled in this story. And I don't know. It's not like a very populated area. There's a lot of forests and stuff.
Ultor de Lacy starts our story off as a young child.
Yes. And he starts off the story by getting traumatized.
Yeah, his father's dying, and he is presented with a portrait inside a box. And for some reason, this is so terrifying. We're not told what exactly it is about it.
No, we just know that he is so terrified that he, like, screams and cries, and he has to be held down and forced to look at it. So not great. But yeah, so basically he gets this legacy from his father. And we also learn right away, not only is he given this terrifying duty to be on the lookout for whatever's in that portrait, but he also gets lands to Cappercullen House, or the deed to the Cappercullen House. Ultor's father is immediately named as a Jacobite, so we've already got this background here.
You know what else he was instructed, which I just found it personally interesting? His father tells him not to get married before the age of 30.
Yeah, I thought that was going to come back around, and it didn't.
It was kind of irrelevant. It was just very fascinating to me. Because usually people want to get married right away.
Yeah, it really, I don't know. I thought it was going to come up again, and then it just didn't. So I was like, all right. Maybe this has something to do with, like, cultural and societal norms. Maybe it was some sort of commentary that Le Fanu was making. I don't know.
You know what? Maybe he was just trying to make his timeline work. He couldn't have Ultor have his daughters too young, because then it wouldn't line up with the historical events he was trying to...
He needed a reason for him to get married later and have kids later.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have questioned it. When he does eventually reach the correct age to get married, he does. And he marries the daughter of another ruined Irish house.
She doesn't last very long anyway.
No, she lasts long enough to give him 2 daughters. We have Alice, who is born first, dark-haired, dark-eyed. She's the sensible one. This is such a almost fairy tale type dynamic to me. You've got the older daughter, dark hair, dark eyes. She's sensible. And then Una is the younger daughter, and she has blue hair and blue eyes. And
you mean blonde hair?
What did I say?
Blue hair and blue eyes. Just imagine she's just got blue hair.
That would be sick.
Then you know that there's a curse.
Then this would be an anime.
Well, she is the main character.
She is. She does have very anime main character syndrome. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and she's pretty, she's sweet, she's imaginative, and she's very fae-like. And so the oldest daughter is designed for a convent. And then the youngest daughter, Ultor, is like, okay, I'm going to marry her off. And that's stakes of this story, which you really don't, maybe I'm just slow, but I didn't figure out the stakes of the story being ending the family line, ending the De Lacy line until like the very end. And then I was like, oh. Whole thing is basically like, I gotta marry my daughter off. And
it would have been the end of the De Lacys, because generally the husband's name is passed on.
Yeah, that's true, but I think at the
Either way, the De Lacy name was ending.
Yeah, the De Lacy name was ending, but I think at the very end, the specific wording was like the bloodline, or the blood, or whatever.
But there was no reason for it to, because when everything happened, Alice still had not taken her vows or anything yet.
No, she could have been married off.
She still could have gotten married. Kind of wondering if they got to that point and they were like, well, I guess that's it, and gave up.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, yeah, your young, beautiful daughter has been stolen away. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. As the story progresses, this is where the Jacobite stuff really comes in, because the rebellion of 1745 is the catalyst that Ultor de Lacy is part of the rebellion. And so because of that, and it's an insurrection. And so obviously the English government is like, hey, dude, we're going to arrest you. But he didn't want that. So he's on the run. His daughters get moved over to Ireland to the Cappercullen house. And basically they're in hiding, but away from their father. So their father is off.
He's in France.
Still hiding from the English government. And he's left his daughters in the care of a manservant and a lady-in-waiting in the family home in Cappercullen in Ireland.
Which is in
County Clare. Yeah, it's in Ruin. It's in County Clare, in case anyone's familiar with the Irish counties. So that's... And then we get kind of an interesting tangent. We get the point of view of some boys from the village. And now this was another thing that I did some detective work on. So the boys are described as having pockets full of nuts and frawns. And I was like, what the heck is that? It's a berry.
Oh.
Also called bilberries.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was just curious, so I looked it up.
You know, I guess then little boys haven't changed a whole lot, have they? They've always got pockets full of something.
Yeah, and so they're basically coming home after frolicking in the forest, and they see a light, the tower of Cappercullen House, which they thought was supposed to be abandoned, because again, this is completely in ruin. It's overgrown, there's these big, tall, ancient trees, blah, blah, blah. Very gothic setting, very spooky ghost house. There's brambles everywhere, and they're trying to run away, and one of the boys gets grabbed by what he thinks is a fairy. And this was another thing. Yes, this little boy is like, oh, I'm among the good people. For an Irish, I guess it would be peasant if this is set in the 1700s, right? With this Irish boy, like the Irish called fairies the good people. And so he's just like, well, I'm being taken to fairyland now.
There's a whole other story there.
There is. And and this came up and I was like, oh, this is intriguing, but this is a bit of a farce. Because the boy gets taken up to these ladies, Alice and Una. And so now they're in hiding. So Una, being the playful, beautiful sister, plays a little trick on this boy and is like, well, we're fairies. And so what I need you to do, I'm going to let you go now. I could do these terrifying things. You know, I could take you to this lake or I could kill you. Or she says that I really liked the way this was phrased. I could send you straight to your bed 2,000 miles underground among the gnomes. I was like, damn, that sounds low-key kind of fun, not gonna lie.
That's pretty metal.
Yeah. Or she could imprison him in the little corner of the moon you see through the window with the man on the moon for your jailer. Which is also interesting to me because the man in the moon, there's always something that lives in the moon. Whether it's a rabbit, a man, it's always something. Across very many cultures, which is fascinating to me. But she's like, I could do all that, but you're in luck. I'm just going to send you home, but don't ever come here again. Nobody should come here. And so, because these De Lacy girls are in hiding, technically, they're basically making it so these superstitious boys and their farmer families are going to be like, we're not going anywhere near that castle.
No, that was just the whole point. With that, the boys and their no one else really comes up again.
No, there's a priest. Correctly. Yeah, there's a priest that comes to visit them, and now this is the same priest that was there with their father Ultor when his father died. So the priest comes and he gives them mass and takes confession of the daughters to keep them, in God's good graces.
So he's in on the mystery.
Yeah, he's in on the curse, the Lacy curse. And so Ultor, he's very adamant, like, you gotta take care of my girls, they gotta give you confession, you gotta give mass to them.
They were almost staving off the curse this way.
Yes, and then, everything is great, and they're getting along fine, right up until the priest, who was coming, I think it was once a week, and then all of a sudden, he starts running into issues. Even though he's been there a million times, takes the same path, he loses his way, but it's not in a normal way. Yeah, so he follows this path, and everything looks normal, but when he gets to the point where he should be getting to the castle, it's not there. Which also reminds me very much that is also a very fairy-like thing to happen, where kind of time and space are elastic and no longer are concrete. So he can't get there, and that's terrifying. And then there was another time he tried to go, and there's this horrible monster that jumps down at him from a hill or like ravine, a ledge of some sort, and it comes tumbling down at him, and it's fast. Like, the way it's described, it tumbles down this mountain, and it lays at the horse's hooves like a huge, palpitating carcass. What a description. That horrified me. Like, what an image. And so then they run away, like, the horse is like, I'm out. No way in hell, man. So the priest has all these issues, and then he's like, I can't do this. I'm not,
Now this is leaving everyone at the mercy of...
Yes, and not only that, but, so Ultor de Lacy has left his daughters in this castle, and the whole plan was, I'm going to secure a place for us in France and come get you when the time is right. And he was visiting them, but, so now at this point, after the priest stops being able to come visit them, their father also stops talking about the plan to get them to France, which is worrisome for them. But so then, after the priest stops coming, they start to see a light in one of the towers. So they're in one castle tower that they've kind of fixed up to be livable, but the rest of the castle they don't really go in. So across the way, in the bell tower, they see a light. It's like, well, that's not normal. And so the one guy that's with them, Lawrence, he's kind of like, he's an old warrior. He campaigned in Italy, so he was in the rebellion as well, or the army at some point. So he takes his pistols, and he's like, I'm gonna go figure it out, but there's nobody there. And this continues, and he puts on his armor, and he's like, I'm gonna get you this time. They're not there. Like, there's nothing there where the light was. It just, whenever he goes to get it, and he climbs up the stairs of the tower, the light goes out. Poof.
See, at this point in the story, because we still, again, don't really know what the curse is supposed to be. So there's still a couple directions at this point it could have taken. It could have gone the Fae route.
And honestly, it was set up that way.
The route it goes is very different.
They're all anxious now. They're kind of getting haunted low-key. This goes on for so long that they become used to it. Old Lawrence doesn't strap his armor on and get his guns every time now. He just kind of glowers at it. The old woman who lives with them, the lady in waiting, she would just, sign of her cross, whatever, would ignore it.
Was he really putting on armor this whole time?
It did say, one of the things is that, again, old Lawrence buckled on his armor, swearing ominously to himself.
Well, let's see. If it's gotta be after 1745, by at least a few years. By the time we get to the 18th century, warfare is totally different than it was during, 14th, 15th, and even the 16th centuries. Especially because by this point, we've gone from matchlock to flintlock firearm.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's the guns.
Even an arrow can punch through armor.
Yeah, so we've got this old man buckling on old-fashioned armor, but taking his pistols to go chase after this mysterious whoever, whatever, with the light in the tower.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a comical image.
It is.
Where you have this old man using this really obsolete kind of technology, and he's chasing after nothing.
Yeah, and he's also at this point, again, because their father is not there with them all the time. So this old man Larry is their protector. Not doing super great so far. He then sees, during the day, a figure who is in the stone tower, and he's got, it's called a claret mark, which just means like a purplish, like a wine-colored birthmark on his face.
Isn't claret a type of wine?
Yeah, well, claret, claret. Yeah, it is a type of wine. So that's just, when the text says claret mark, it just means the color of the mark. It's not like a specific type of anything.
I mean, if you're speaking English, it could be claret. I just look at it and see a French.
There's a lot of French in the story.
I've heard birthmarks like that referred to as a port wine.
So have I. I had never heard claret mark, so I wonder if maybe it was like the nomenclature of the time.
Yeah, well, I just figured if it was similar to a port wine mark, that it just, claret is also a wine that is just like a reddish mark on the skin.
Yeah, which is a really interesting kind of tidbit here. This was not done on purpose, but we did just read the birthmark. So we once again have, except here, the birthmark itself is not an indicator of sin. However, the man with the birthmark is kind of the sins of the past haunting the present. Because this ghost is supposed to be, spoiler, but the ghost is someone who the De family had executed unjustly years and years and years ago. And it was actually when I was looking up the claret mark, is how I discovered that there's a radio play about the De family. Yeah, so the radio play was first run in 1978 by the CBS Radio Mystery Theater. But it's about the last surviving member of the De line during the Irish Rebellion. And this Irish matron warns her family about there's a man with a claret-colored birthmark that haunts their family because he was executed.
So the radio play is an adaptation of this story.
A bit of a different framing device, but it's the same thing. Now, old Lawrence is seeing this apparition now. It's not just a light in the tower at night. It's a man in the daytime. And he's like, I'm going to shoot you. And the guy doesn't come out. I'm going to read what old Larry says here because I just thought it was brilliant. I give you while I count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you draw back, I'll fire mind. 5, 6. You'd better be lively. 7, 8, 9. One chance more. Will you come down? Then take it. 10. I just think, like, that's so dramatic. That's so, like, it reminds me of if you're dealing with a child.
Yeah. You get 1, 2, 2.5.
Yeah.
2 3/4.
But that's what it reminded me of.
Giving them all the extra chances.
Yeah. One chance more. Will you come down? The ghost doesn't move. Larry fires. And even though Larry is supposed to be a dead shot, he's supposed to be super good, he misses. He shoots the stone wall and dust comes out. Okay, so then Ultor comes up, accompanied by a handsome young man. He's like, what are you doing, Larry? Who are you shooting at? And Larry's like, there was somebody in the window. And Ultor's like, no, there's not. And so all we see now, so Larry looks up again, and instead of a man, there's yellow and red ivy, roughly in the shape of a face. And so, Larry's freaked out.
So now here's the question. Was there really anyone there? Or did Larry confuse the ivy for a person? We know the answer, of course, but at this point in the story, you don't necessarily know.
Yeah, at this point in the story, you're like, okay, is this an Anne Radcliffe story where everything has an explanation?
Of course it's not, because it's a Le Fanu story.
Yes. But so then we find out that Ultor had brought with him somebody he wants to marry his youngest daughter from France. So this guy is a Frenchman. They all get along, spend a bunch of time together. They have these conversations about their future and how Ultor wants Una to marry this handsome French guy. Oh yeah, and here it says, Ultor says to Alice, you, dear Alice, are promised to a conventual life. So I wonder if maybe she was promised to a convent, but then, like, why is she not there already? I don't know.
Excuses.
Yeah.
It just has to keep reminding us that one of them has to be, I guess, the ugly daughter, and the other one is the pretty daughter. So that we feel all the more sad when the pretty daughter meets her fate.
Yeah, this basically just exists so that there could be two daughters. Only one of them could be married. And so, yeah, so Ultor's like, Una, through her marriage, carry the blood and the lineage, even if not the name. And so basically Ultor's whole thing is like, our bloodline, our lineage will again have power and honor in this country.
Except for they were still going to go to France.
Yeah, I mean, he was still on the run from England. So they're having these conversations. They're having a nice little walk. on the grounds of the castle, but then they see a figure. And now this is vaguely human figure, but it's a little weird. So it's ungainly, it's tall, lean, dressed in a dingy Spanish kind of clothing, and his fingers in particular, his hands are described as having long, like, yellow fingers and a sickly face with a big purple birthmark on half the cheek. So once again, we have a sighting of this claret-marked man. And so then Ultor is absolutely floored. He is agog with terror, shall we say. He draws his sword and chases after this thing, but it goes around a corner, vanishes. And Ultor is not pleased about this because he knows the figure, he knows that man. He knows what that man looks like because he was given a portrait of him when he was 12 years old when his father died. I
guess it was the description of the long yellow hands that I suppose you could get a vampire reading out of this.
There's one other thing that really screams vampire to me that I'll talk about when we get to it in the story. Ultor is really upset by this, and he kind of hints this is a family curse, and exorcisms won't make it go away. Nothing can appease it. Basically looking for the ruination of the house. And now Ultor's like, where the heck is that frickin' priest? Why is he not here taking the confession of my children?
He hasn't been around for quite some time.
So then he's like, I'll get Lawrence to take your written confession to the priest. I'll get that priest here. I'll make sure he comes.
But it's too late now. They've already seen the figure, the thing that's going to bring them doom.
And this is another thing that kind of reminded me of vampires. So he gives to Alice, he opens a silver box that he had on him. Let me just read the exact quote. Fold and sew it up reverently in a bit of the old sultry parchment and wear it next to your heart. It's a fragment of the consecrated wafer and will help with the saint's protection to guard you from harm. So he gives them, pretty sure it's just like a communion wafer, right?
Yeah.
And so he keeps communion wafers in a small silver box on his person at all times, apparently.
Wafers were one of the things that Van Helsing used in Dracula.
Yeah, using religious, is paraphernalia the right word? Religious?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Is a very vampiric thing to do. Like, to defend, especially that it's in a silver box as well.
Vampires, demons. I would say we don't usually hear about, I'm trying to think, like, with a ghost story. I kind of feel like most of the stories that we have where the ghosts are especially malevolent are not purely ghosts. They're usually some kind of demon.
Yeah, usually ghosts are more of a harmless sort of thing than, like, if something really serious is causing harm or terror or stuff like that. It usually ends up to be a demon.
Yeah, I'm even trying to think of movies that we've seen. If the monster or the creature is a ghost, usually there's no way to stop it.
No, the only way is to, like, sometimes you can do...
You have to appease it.
Yeah, you have to help it kind of solve whatever is keeping it on the earth, whatever unfinished business.
Give it what it wants.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not really something you could use things to ward away.
No, usually, like, the religious... Like, you don't usually protect yourself from ghosts by, like, holding out a cross, right? Like, because they don't usually directly cause harm that way. So I just thought that was interesting. But so after this sighting, Una, the young beautiful one, starts to act differently. And this also reminded me of a vampire. She's acting oddly. She's not fun. And, like, she's not the fun one anymore. She's not all silly and jolly. She gets pale. She has less energy. Instead of trying to hang out with her sister and everybody, she's ignoring them. And everyone was like, oh, what's wrong with you? And she's like, oh, I'm fine. But obviously, she was acting oddly.
Yes, because she's being taken over by a malevolent force.
Yeah, so everyone sees this, and Alice, the older sister, is very stressed out. She asked her sister to be like, tell her the truth. She won't. And Una, she would talk to herself. She would have this weird, creepy smile. And now keep in mind, they're all living in the same tower of this dilapidated castle. And they share a room, and it used to be tons of fun, and they decorated it and all this. But then Una is like, nah, we're not going to sleep in the same room together. And she won't say why.
So she could have midnight meetings with our ghostly friend.
Yes, and this also really reminded me of a vampire. Because, Una sets up a room across the hall. Alice, hears her talking sometimes, but her door is locked. And Una's like, I'm not talking to anybody. All this stuff happens.
Except Alice also hears the voice of a man, which in itself, that's quite scandalous. And then she hears singing, and there's someone harmonizing with Una as well. So it was really interesting to me. So obviously, we as smart people know that this mysterious figure that we've seen in the tower and walking around on the grounds is probably what Una's communicating with. She's developing a relationship with it. And aside from her acting kind of like she's distancing herself from her sister, but it never seems to be, she's not struggling against it. She's not fighting against this force at all. She's very much welcoming it, and she's talking to it. She's singing with it, and it's almost like she's a willing participant in whatever this is going on.
Yeah, but definitely, because we find out it's just like one line, but later Alice mentions that she hears footsteps on the door outside her room, and she's freaked out because all this stuff is happening. So she gets up to check the door to make sure that it's locked. And she hears a male voice kind of laughing and then walking away. And I kind of interpreted that to be what if the same thing happened to Una, but Una, being the younger, naive, kind of happy, that's my theory. That, Una was being protected and nobody was telling her anything, and she was just super happy and innocent, and then because she doesn't think to be afraid of this kind of thing, doesn't know to be afraid of it, she lets the dark spirit in, and then it kind of takes over and leads her down this path.
You have to figure, too, she's kind of like the more adventurous sister, right? Where Alice is described as being more serious and austere and kind of by the rules. So what if Una just was looking for some excitement? I can't imagine that being trapped in this castle, because they're hiding.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to have anyone know that they're there. You're only seeing the same 3 people day in, day out. You're waiting for your father to tell you to go somewhere and do something, but he seems to have forgotten about it. So this is kind of exciting.
Yeah, Alice definitely doesn't agree.
Well, no, because she's the serious daughter who was told she's gonna go join a convent and was just okay with it.
Yeah, and she's trying to, save her sister from this, but her sister is first of all, there's nothing going on, you're crazy. And second of all, this sister also doesn't want to be saved.
No.
But so, they're dealing with this, and she's like, Ultor, Dad, you gotta do something, this is not great. And so he's like, I talked with the priest, and he'll be here tomorrow, but alas, too late. It will be too late. So Una has this moment where she says goodnight to her sister, and then something in her face changes, and Alice sees, her old kind of personality come through a little bit, and her eyes fill up with tears, and she starts crying, looking at her sister. And Alice is like, oh my god, you're normal again. And Una's like, actually, I'm not.
Or just she knows what's gonna happen, so it's a goodbye.
Yes, she just starts singing an old Irish folk song. You can look this up and actually listen to it on YouTube. If you're familiar with Irish folk songs, it's pretty famous. But it's Shula Rune. In the story, it's spelled Shule, and then a rune is Aroon, which will bring up a bunch of YouTube things that you can listen, choir performances. But in Irish, Shula Rune means go, my love. And this song is said to have originated in the Glorious Revolution, which is another Jacobite-linked war. Fun fact there. A very famous Irish song. Very beautiful. A little bit of a tangent. It's also interesting because if you don't know too much about the Irish history, basically England came and colonized them. It's been up and down ever since. And one of the things England did was to suppress the Irish language as a way of kind of bringing them under British rule. And so what happened to a lot of traditional Irish songs is that the verses would be translated to English. So a lot of the verses, the original Irish verses, have been lost. But the chorus will remain in the original Irish, which I thought that was really interesting to me. Anyway, that's just a little fun fact. Una is making ready to leave. She leaves a little present for her sister in her bed. Alice sees this, and she gets scared. She's like, oh my god, what's happening? What's she gonna do? She goes into her room, and she's trying to figure out what's going on, but Una is just there asleep in bed. She's not going anywhere. She's not doing anything. And, so was it a dream? Is Una lying? We don't know. So Alice goes back to her room, and then a little while later, Una is fully dressed, dressed for traveling. She's got thick, heavy boots. She's got a cloak. She's got some stuff with her. So she's leaving. And she doesn't leave through the door or down the hallway or anything. She goes back into her chamber and is never seen again. That's it.
Very mysterious.
This is the section where... So Alice is awake and she's terrified. She has no idea what's going on. This is all very strange. There's a knock on her door, the one by the staircase. She makes sure it's locked. And then she hears someone laughing. And so that's where my theory came from. Una leaves... On her bed, on the headboard, she writes, Ultor de Lacy, Ultor O'Donnell. Alice finds underneath her pillow a little embroidery that just says Una's love. So basically it was a goodbye. Ultor de Lacy blames the priest for not taking the confession of his children. That's the reason why Una was taken by the quote-unquote machinations of the fiend. And
yeah, so the chalk on the headboard is like a taunt. Because... You had talked about this earlier, so the name Ultor meant Avenger, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Punisher.
Yeah, so now O'Donnell was the name of the person who comes back for revenge.
Yes.
So he's using Ultor's own name to taunt him.
And also, I think it's in the last... So this story, it is a short story, but it's divided into chapters. But so in the very end, the narrator kind of lets us in on some of this stuff. After Ultor dies, Alice finds the portrait of the guy with the birthmark. It's also, conveniently, it comes with a little piece of paper that tells the story about how the de Lacy family took a bunch of prisoners, one of whom was Roderick O'Donnell, who was Spanish and Irish. They were related through someone's mother. And instead of being given any sort of mercy or anything, de Lacy is like, nah, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna kill you. We're gonna hang you off the gallows. So then this guy, he would devote himself to blast the greatness of the de Lacys and never leave them till his work was done. His likeness was shown to all the young children of that lineage, which, plot hole, Ultor didn't show it to Una or Alice, so maybe he should have. Maybe it was only shown to the boy children, so that they won't be taken in by him, and he won't be able to trick them and make them do his will.
Boy, Ultor messed up, didn't he?
He did.
Big time. He never showed his daughters the portrait of the person they should avoid at all costs, which led to Una not...
No, there was no reason. It also mentions, which this to me also kind of reminds me of fairies, back to that. But so after Una goes missing, people would see her sometimes and just catch glimpses of her. And sometimes she'd be combing her hair, and then she would smile at whoever found her. Or, sometimes you could hear her singing in the glen. Kind of ghostly. To me, the thing that said Fae, screamed Fae about that, was the fact that she'd be combing her hair. I don't know. Ghosts don't usually... I don't know. Maybe I just want it to be fairies.
Fairies are a more fun explanation.
Yeah.
I don't think it's vampires.
No, but it did kind of remind me of vampires. And that was another thing about, how Alice... somebody knocks on her door and she doesn't let them in. That also kind of got... This is pure... If, in my little hypothetical scenario, the ghost is knocking, waiting to be let in, that also is kind of vampiric. I also just think that it's kind of the metaphor here, and not necessarily creature lore.
I guess it's... Yeah, well, when you have the vampire, or you should say the ghost in the story, and then you have the vampire in Carmilla, and even Dracula, who kind of single out a victim, and then they start their machinations by like isolating that person and very slowly draining their life force. It's a very similar thing.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a long con. Well, and honestly, this ghost put even more time into it than vampires, because this ghost has been at it for generations.
Yeah, well, the vampires need to eat now.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't have as long to hold out. They gotta eat. They still have corporeal bodies that need nourishment in order to keep them going.
True.
A ghost doesn't really need anything. It kind of just exists. So yeah, it can play the long game. All it's gotta do is sit and wait.
Yeah. And indeed it did. And then it got Una, got what it wanted. Alice goes on to join the nunnery, becomes Sister Agnes.
Wasn't there a Sister Agnes in Udolpho, too?
Oh, was there? Yes.
I think I had read that Le Fanu actually was a fan of Anne Radcliffe's work.
Oh, that makes sense.
I don't know exactly where I read it, but I'm pretty sure that I did read that he read her books. I mean, everything that we create is inspired by what comes before.
Classic Gothic stories and authors, a lot of them, are very intermingled. They're all related to each other, not in a familial way, but... Oh yeah, Sister Agnes is a nun in the French in Udolpho. She's a nun in a French monastery, and she's the heiress of the House of Udolpho.
Okay, I found that he had read Radcliffe. It's on his Wikipedia page, and then there's a section about historical fiction that he wrote. And he wrote a novel called The House by the Churchyard, and it says, here Le Fanu's historical style is blended with his later Gothic style, influenced by his reading of the classic writers of that genre, such as Anne Radcliffe.
A man of taste. So this one, it had some vampire vibes, it had some fairy vibes, but ultimately it ended up being a ghost story.
Yeah, and this one predates Carmilla, so let me see if I also read this or was imagining it as well. He frequently reworked plots and ideas from his earlier writing. You could reasonably make the argument that the ghost or the creature in this, he used some of the same elements.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. Well, and then you could even argue then, too, that, since Le Fanu would later go on to write Carmilla, which would later go on to inspire Dracula, which is where we get most of our vampire lore. So, because we've read those things, that's kind of coloring our view of this story. So that could be why you're seeing hints of vampirism in here, is because we have those lenses.
Which, again, probably he's reusing elements. It's intentional, even though the exact nature of the creature in each story is different.
Yeah. And honestly, it's kind of encouraging. I don't feel so bad about reusing certain ideas.
Oh, no, not at all. If it's good enough for Le Fanu to recycle ideas, improve them, expand upon them, make them better.
Yeah, why not us?
I just think that he's great and very underappreciated.
Yeah, I know. I gotta get my hands on some hard copies. I had a bit of a wander on my birthday. I went to a local bookstore because I had a gift card. So I was kind of wandering around, and I almost got a hard copy of Carmilla, but I didn't. I ended up getting a book of poetry by a local poet. It was a cool copy of Carmilla. It had pages, had red spray on the edges. So it was a black cover with red details. It looked pretty cool. They didn't have any of his other works. Yeah, so, I had a good time with this story. Hopefully you enjoyed it, audience. We learned a little bit about history.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this had a little bit of everything, but that's Le Fanu's thing, because he also wrote historical fiction. Was a blend of all his interests, I guess.
Listen, go look up the history of Ireland. Audience, I'm not commanding you to do this, Sam. I mean, you could, but I'll
just have to I'll have to become an expert on Irish history just because you told me to.
Well, don't be an expert, because I'm not an expert, and then you'll make me look bad.
Alright, then I won't do that.
It is very fascinating. Even some of the history that Le Fanu talks about in this story, the effects of that are still felt in Ireland to this day. Anyways, it's worth looking into. It's on my mind because St. Patrick's Day is coming up, and I have a lot of complicated feelings about it. as someone who Irish danced, but is also pagan.
You know, we can revisit Le Fanu again for mysteries.
We should, because I really like reading him.
Yeah, we should just throw him in there whenever we can.
Yeah, Haunted Heart Society favorites. Le Fanu.
I think he is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, it's easy to read, and his writing is really impactful. Like, some turns of phrase in this are just really like, ooh. But anyways, shall we sign off?
All right.
Well, we'll see you next time, Internet. We'll have a longer piece of work to discuss next time.
A longer piece of work, but I was going to say these short story discussions have been pretty lengthy.
I know. I don't know how that keeps happening. I was like, oh yeah, this will go super quick. It never does. Yeah. All right. So we'll see you next time. Let us know down below if you've read this short story, and if you haven't, you can go find it online for free. Highly recommend. All right. See you later.
Bye.